Silence reveals what noise hides. You feel the urge to respond, and it feels justified. Someone says something careless, dismissive, or subtly provocative, and almost instantly, your mind begins forming a reply. Not because it's necessary but because something inside you wants to be seen, understood, or corrected. That impulse is rarely about truth. It is about emotional exposure. Most people never question this reaction. They assume speaking is strength, that responding is clarity, that defending themselves is intelligence. But what they fail to notice is that every reaction reveals a point of entry. The moment you feel compelled to respond, you've already been pulled into someone else's frame. Your emotional state is no longer self-directed, it has been influenced, shaped, and slightly controlled. Noise creates an illusion of importance. The louder the environment, the more people believe that engagement equals relevance. Arguments, opinions, interruptions, and emotional expressions begin to dominate the space. But beneath all of that, something more subtle is happening. Those who speak the most are often the least aware of themselves. They react not because they choose to, but because they cannot tolerate silence. Silence, on the other hand, exposes everything. When you stop responding, you begin to see patterns that are otherwise invisible. You notice who is trying to dominate the conversation, who is seeking validation, who is uncomfortable with stillness, and who becomes uneasy when they are not being acknowledged. These behaviors are not random, they are signals, and silence allows you to read them without distortion. This is where the shift begins. Instead of participating, you observe. Instead of reacting, you process. Instead of proving something, you understand what is actually happening beneath the surface. The emotional tension that once pushed you to respond starts to lose its urgency. You realize that not everything requires your involvement, and more importantly, not everything deserves your energy. There is a quiet form of control in this. Not control over others but control over yourself, and that changes the dynamic completely. When you don't respond, people begin to reveal more than they intended. They fill the silence, they over-explain, they escalate, they expose their own insecurities without realizing it. What once felt like a need to defend yourself becomes an opportunity to understand others at a deeper level. Silence is not emptiness. It is awareness without interference. Over time, this creates a different kind of presence. You are no longer seen as reactive or predictable. You become someone who cannot be easily read. Someone who does not engage impulsively. Someone who does not need to assert themselves to feel stable. And this changes how people interact with you. Because when noise dominates the environment, silence becomes noticeable. And when silence is intentional, it becomes powerful. The hidden hierarchy of restraint. Most people believe power is expressed through visibility, through speaking, asserting, correcting, and proving. They assume that the one who talks more, reacts faster, or dominates conversations is the one in control. But if you observe closely, you'll notice something different. The ones who truly hold psychological weight are often the least reactive. There is an invisible hierarchy in every interaction. It's not based on status, volume, or intelligence in the obvious sense. It is based on emotional stability. And the fastest way to reveal your position in that hierarchy is through how easily you react. People are constantly testing each other, though rarely in obvious ways. A comment here, a subtle jab there, a dismissive tone, an interruption. These are not always intentional acts of aggression, but they function as signals. They probe for reactions. They look for openings. And when you respond quickly, emotionally, or defensively, you reveal exactly where those openings are. What most people don't see is that reaction creates accessibility. The moment you react, you become readable. Your emotional patterns become visible. Others begin to understand what affects you, what triggers you, what pulls you in. And once that is understood, whether consciously or unconsciously, it becomes leverage. Not in a manipulative sense, but in a behavioral sense. People adjust how they interact with you based on what they can get from you. This is why restraint changes everything. When you don't react immediately, something unusual happens. The expected pattern breaks. The other person is left without feedback. There is no confirmation, no emotional response to work with. And this creates uncertainty. Not confusion in a chaotic sense, but a psychological gap. They cannot easily place you within their usual framework. This unpredictability is not about being mysterious. It is about being self-contained. You are no longer operating on impulse. You are not feeding the dynamic. You are not reinforcing the pattern. Instead, you are holding your position without needing to express it. And that alone shifts the balance. Over time, this creates a different perception. You are seen as composed, but more importantly, as someone who is not easily influenced. Conversations with you become more measured. People think before speaking. They adjust their tone, their approach, their assumptions. Not because you demanded it, but because your restraint made it necessary. There is also a deeper layer to this. Restraint is not suppression. It is selection. You are not silent because you have nothing to say. You are silent because you choose when to speak, and that choice carries weight. When you do respond, it is no longer impulsive or reactive. It is deliberate. It has clarity. It is grounded. And because it is rare, it is taken more seriously. Most people dilute their influence by speaking too often, reacting too quickly, and engaging too easily. They spread their presence thin across every situation, but the one who practices restraint concentrates their presence. They become more defined, more intentional, more precise. This is the hidden hierarchy. Not who speaks the loudest, but who remains stable when others cannot. Not who reacts first, but who decides whether to react at all. And over time, this positions you differently. You are no longer part of the immediate exchange. You are slightly outside of it, observing, choosing, controlling your involvement. And that distance is what creates authority. Because when you are not easily pulled in, you are not easily influenced. And when you are not easily influenced, you begin to operate on your own terms. The discipline of not needing to respond there is a specific moment that defines most people more than they realize. It's not when they are calm, or when everything is going well. It's the moment when something inside them reacts, when they feel the urge to correct, to defend, to explain, or to prove a point. In that moment there is a tension, a quiet internal pressure that says, say something. And most people obey it without question. The difficulty is not in speaking. The difficulty is in resisting the need to speak, because that need is rarely about logic, it is emotional. It is tied to identity, to ego, to the discomfort of being misunderstood or overlooked. When someone challenges you, directly or indirectly, it creates a subtle instability, and the mind tries to restore that stability through reaction. But reaction is not resolution, it is release. When you respond impulsively, you are not choosing your words, you are discharging tension. And in doing so, you give away control, not because you are wrong, but because you are no longer operating from awareness. You are operating from urgency. This is where discipline begins. Discipline is not about forcing silence. It is about recognizing that the urge to respond is not always a command, it is a signal that something has been triggered internally. And instead of acting on it immediately, you begin to observe it. You let the feeling exist without attaching action to it. This creates space. In that space, something important happens. The intensity of the reaction begins to fade. What once felt urgent becomes optional. The need to respond weakens. And with that, clarity starts to emerge. You begin to see whether a response is actually necessary or if it was just a reflex. Most interactions do not require your input. They only feel like they do because you are used to engaging, used to participating, used to filling silence with words. But once you step back, you realize how much of your energy was being spent on things that had no long-term value. Not every statement deserves correction. Not every opinion deserves opposition. Not every situation deserves your attention. This is not passivity. It is precision. You are no longer reacting to everything. You are choosing what aligns with your focus and what does not. You begin to filter your responses, not based on emotion, but on relevance. And this changes how you move through conversations entirely. There is also a boundary that forms through this discipline, a mental boundary. People begin to sense that you are not easily drawn in, that your attention is not automatically available, that your reactions are not predictable, and this creates distancino in a negative sense, but in a controlled, intentional way. You are present, but not entangled. Over time, this builds a different kind of internal structure. You are no longer dependent on expressing yourself to feel stable. You are no longer driven by the need to resolve every tension externally. You can hold discomfort without immediately acting on it. You can hear something without needing to respond. You can be challenged without needing to defend. This is where real control exists. Not in dominating conversations, but in not being dominated by your own impulses. Because once you are no longer controlled by the need to react, you are no longer easily influenced by what happens around you. The quiet position of untouchable presence, there comes a point where something changes in how you move through the world. Not outwardly in a dramatic way, but internal in a way that is difficult to explain but easy to feel. Situations that once pulled a reaction out of you no longer carry the same weight. Words that once stayed in your mind begin to pass through without resistance. The need to respond slowly dissolves. Most people spend their lives reacting. They adjust their mood based on others, their tone based on conversations, their thoughts based on what is said around them. Their internal state is constantly shifting, not because they lack intelligence, but because they have not created distance between themselves and external influence. But when that distance begins to form, something else becomes visible. When you stop reacting, people reveal more than they intend to. Without your immediate response, they continue speaking. They explain themselves further. They contradict themselves. They expose patterns in their thinking, their insecurities, their intentions. What used to feel like moments you needed to engage in become moments you can observe with clarity. You are no longer trying to understand what is happening while being inside it. You are seeing it from just enough distance to interpret it accurately. This is where detachment shifts from an idea into a position. It is not about withdrawing from people or avoiding interaction. It is about no longer being pulled into every dynamic. You remain present, but your state is not dependent on what is happening around you. You can engage when necessary, but you are not compelled to. Over time, this creates a different kind of presence. Not loud, not forceful, but noticeable. People begin to sense that you are not easily influenced, that you are not reacting in expected ways, that your silence is not confusion, but control. And this changes how they interact with you, even if they cannot explain why. There is also a long-term effect to this. When you consistently operate from this position, your internal environment stabilizes. You are not constantly adjusting to external shifts. Your thoughts become clearer. Your decisions become more deliberate. You are no longer scattered across reactions, you are centered within your own awareness. This does not make you distant, it makes you grounded, and from that grounded position, something else emerges. You begin to realize that most of what once affected you was never as significant as it felt. It only appeared powerful because it was immediate, because it triggered a response, because it entered your attention without resistance. But once you stop giving that response, its influence weakens. Not everything loses meaning, but everything loses its ability to control you. And in that quiet space, without the need to prove, react, or engage unnecessarily, you begin to operate differently, more selectively, more intentionally, more clearly. You are still aware of everything around you. You still understand what is being said, what is happening, what others are doing, but none of it moves you unless you choose to be moved. And that is where the shift completes. You are no longer part of the noise. You are the one who hears it, without being affected by it.